I asked my criminal law professor if a client ever scared him. His story haunts me to this day. I get chills when I think about it. I changed certain details to make it harder to Google this case. I was able to find it when he initially told me this story, but there's more truth in this than you want there to be. I had a fantastic law school professor who was always exceptionally good to me. I was a bit of an oddball, and he took me under his wing. His wife Mary would come to school every Friday, and the three of us would have lunch together. We got pretty close, and I noticed he was very protective of her. My professor had been a public defense attorney for 20 years before he went into academia. He had a very good attitude about former clients and even visited a few in prison, including a few folks on death row. He said you learned pretty quickly that most people are indeed guilty, but you also learn to separate clients from their crimes. Almost all of his homicide cases were gang-related, and he was a pretty big believer that most gang violence is done under duress. He was also a really big advocate for shorter sentences for minors and better rehabilitation programs. He said even folks who committed really heinous crimes and deserved life in prison would still have their humanity and tended to be easy to work with. My point is that although he was very realistic about how most folks are guilty, he wasn't bitter. Once when I was doing research for him, we had some free time. He always spoke so highly of his clients, so I finally asked if he ever encountered an actual psychopath or someone who scared him. This was his story. For folks who don't know, public defenders don't have total control over their caseload. They develop a certain expertise, but a lot of them get assigned the cases they're assigned. Anyway, he got assigned a homicide case that was pretty fucking brutal. A woman has been mutilated while still alive, assaulted and violently murdered. The photos were so bad that my professor got a little sick when he saw them. What's worse is that it was almost certainly tied to two other cases with women who had also been mutilated, assaulted, and killed. They had no physical evidence, but they narrowed down a suspect who became my professor's client. The thing is, this client did not seem like the type. My professor had learned pretty early on that violent psychopaths usually have a trail of violence in their history before they graduate to murder. He also noted that usually conventionally successful psychopaths did not commit violent crimes because they had worked so hard to acclimate without letting the masks slip. It should also be noted that before this story, he didn't actually believe in a mask. He found his clients were pretty upfront with him about what crime they committed and why. He said most people who lied to him were pretty stupid. This guy was physically small and had a wife and kids. He wasn't wealthy, but he did have a good job and friends. He was exceedingly polite in their meetings and oddly soft-spoken. He also talked about how much he loved his daughters and was a feminist. This guy was adamant that he was innocent. My professor kind of shrugged it off. He didn't spend much time analyzing if someone was innocent or guilty, but rather what facts could be proven in court. Everything else was a waste of time. Something about this guy and the crime he had committed didn't make a lot of sense to my professor. Not only that, but the state had virtually no solid evidence. As time went on, my professor genuinely started to believe his client might be innocent and started going super hard on this case. He got a witness buried from testifying, which really rattled the prosecution. One of the things that convinced my professor that most of his client's innocence was the way his client responded to seeing photos of the victims. They were going to be shown in court, and my professor wanted him to be prepared. The guy looked like he was going to throw up. He'd been over a trash can and looked distraught. He also just started rambling like he was experiencing a genuine, authentic trauma response. He just went off about how the girl's ear was torn off, and he kept imagining his wife in that position. He said something a little odd, though. I don't know why, but the fact that all the victims are blonde and my wife is brunette is getting to me. What if it could have been her, if she had dyed her hair a different color? My professor stared at him with an open mouth, and for a moment he stopped being his attorney and was just a human. My wife Mary is a Latina woman, and I had the same thought when I saw these photos, like maybe it would have been her, with just a twist of fate. You can now check if there's a part 2 by pressing share and more.